Are you recording it out?
Yeah.
Right, Kevin, teach us.
Okay, so continuing with the melachot, and the next one is cosmetics. Cosmetics used to color the skin may not be used. In addition, neither nail varnish nor colorless lipstick may be applied. There is a view which allows the use of face powder if it does not adhere to the skin and therefore wears away rather quickly. Aerosol spray such as deodorant may be used on the skin or in the air, but may not be sprayed onto clothing. And it says, Moshe Feinstein Zatzal once issued a statement, part of which reads as follows. Inquiries have indicated that most cosmetic powders contain an oil base which causes the powders to adhere to the skin to a considerable degree. In these cases, they are included in the prohibition against dyeing. Nevertheless, there are some powders which, despite containing similar ingredients, do not adhere to the skin. The use of these powders is permitted. It should be noted that without the proper experience in conducting experiments, it is extremely difficult to make an evaluation. Then Rabbi Avram Blumenkranz of Far Rockaway, New York, has given his written approval to some types of face powder, blush, and eyeshadow that may be used on Shabbos. These are sold under the following brand names. It doesn't apply to us. Consumer must make sure the cosmetic is approved for Shabbos use, and it may be used only under the following conditions. It is in powder form, not in cake form, from before Shabbos. B, it is applied with a brush, not a sponge pad or absorbent cotton. C, the face must be dry. And C, colors may not be mixed, neither in a cosmetics case nor on the face. So, Arthur, this will apply to your wife. Let her watch the recording. We're not cross-dressers or trans, so you must edit it out, please, Damon, or transgender, so this won't apply to us, okay?
Oh, and how do you know? I've got a wife. I like her clothes. They really fit me. You know? You seen me. My wife's done. Yeah. Okay, next.
You my brew, not my bra, Arthur.
By the way, Kev, have you actually seen my wife with makeup on ever?
I don't see her. When I come, she doesn't wear
on the bike. Does she ever have makeup? My wife doesn't. I think
I
she only had makeup on once when she went to a wedding. And I think once at my wedding. That was it.
Oh, serious?
Yeah, she doesn't need makeup. She's naturally beautiful. So, I mean, she doesn't need to. Some women need to. Other ones are just naturally beautiful.
Sure. She walked in the room, didn't she, Art?
Now she can watch this recording and I'll get bonus points.
Yeah.
And David's right. She probably walked into the room right now. She's left now.
All right, guys. All right, let's get started. Okay. So another Tana derives a different exemption from the phrase, the owner of the ox is absolved, the word naki. Okay. So we were talking about Rav Eliezer yesterday. Now we're talking about Rav Yossi Haglili. So it was taught in a different brayso. The scripture states the owner of the ox is absolved. Rav Yossi Haglili says he is absolved from paying the value of the offspring that were aborted as a result of his ox attacking a pregnant woman. Okay? But Rabbi Akiva said to Rav Yossi Haglili that why this law is implicit in that passage, because the verse says, if men shall fight and they jolt a pregnant woman and her offspring were miscarried, he shall surely be punished, etc. So the verse implies that only men are required to pay the value of a fetus they cause to be aborted, but not oxen. Hence, your exposition is unnecessary. Okay? Do any of you guys remember that particular verse in the Chazorah? Or not really?
I do, but I heard it from when the Rav was talking about it, when he mentioned that. They got it from the men fighting and not from the, the men fighting and not from the ox fighting.
Okay, yeah, so Rabbi Akiva is saying...
But how did that link up, though? Is it because... Well, you'll tell us.
Okay, because it's saying that the owner of the ox is absolved. So he was saying that, look, the owner of the ox is absolved. Let me just get rid of this cat a sec, guys. Just give me a sec. It's the bane of my existence. Just give me one second, guys. 1 sec. Let me just get something for it. Sorry, guys.
You notice how well trained my cat is. You guys doesn't interfere with the show.
Yeah, it's very disciplined, very well. You trained it well, Kevin. And Mark and Dustin helped you out with that too. They 100%. Trained the cat well for you also, eh?
I've actually got 10 cats here. They're very well trained.
You heard that, Arthur?
Wait till you get to Mrs. Cat. I want to see how well you have her trained.
All my cats are Cohens, eh? All Cohen here. All right, carry on.
All right, guys. Let's start. All right, so I got the cat off. I had to redo my keys. All right. I think the cat's got me trained. I think the cat knows it gets biscuits when I try and bribe it off the keyboard. Hence, when it's hungry, it sits on the keyboard. I think it's got me very well trained, actually.
Absolutely. Your camera's not allowed.
All right, sorry.
Oh, man.
All right. All right, so guys, look, just the bottom line is as follows. When we learned the Mishnah, we were talking about the owner of the ox that is absolved, and we learned different explanations. The word naki also means innocent. It means cleaned, etc. So the first thing that we learned was the case of the hide and the animal use of in terms of its meat, etc. And that even when the animal wasn't stoned, that you couldn't make use of it. Or if you shechted it while the sentence was carried out, but it was dead before it actually got stoned, or certain other circumstances, it was still saying that you couldn't derive benefit from the meat or anything auxiliary like the hide. Then there was the Rav Eliezer part, which turned around and said if there was one witness or the owner, the animal wouldn't be sentenced to death, and therefore the half kofir payment you'd think you'd owe. But in that circumstance, the owner of the ox is absolved is telling you don't have to pay the half kofir. Then he used, obviously, the example of when the animal's intent was different. The animal intended to kill another animal but killed a Jew. The animal intended to kill an Egyptian but killed a Jew. The animal was going to kill a non-viable fetus or treifa, but ended up killing a viable Jew. And in those particular cases, just like you wouldn't give a person the death penalty for those particular things, so too, it's the same thing when you give the death penalty to an ox owned by a Jew. So that's exactly what we're dealing with here. So now there's another Tanan saying he's got a different opinion on the phrase, the owner of the ox is absolved. So Rav, because we've gone through the different Tanaim. So Rav Yossi Aglili is saying, look, he's absolved from paying in a case where the ox attacks a pregnant woman and then the fetus has to be aborted. So in that case, that's what the verse is coming to tell us. And Rabbi Akiva is saying, look, it doesn't make sense that the verse would have to bring that to tell us the obvious. Why is it obvious? Because the verse says very clearly that if men shall fight, meaning men plural, shall fight with one another, and they shall jolt a pregnant woman, and her offspring were miscarried, he shall surely be punished. So he's saying, obviously, there you pay. But who's to say that men have anything to do with oxen? It's implicit in the verse. Why would you need a specific verse to say the owner of the ox is absolved in that case? It doesn't make sense. So Rav Ula, the son of Rav Idi, explains Rav Yossi HaKlili, and he contends that the exposition is needed. Why? Because you might have thought to say that the verse is expounded to exempt only certain types of animals, as follows. So you're saying, look, men are obligated to pay the value of a fetus, but not oxen that are similar to men. So let's just explain what this means. Men are always muad. Why are human beings muad, guys? Always?
With the awake or asleep, we are responsible for our actions.
Correct, because we know consequence. So when we are asleep, we have to put those articles that we could damage away before we in an unconscious state and we could damage them, because we've got the intelligence to see consequence. Now, so therefore, we're always responsible for our actions. So it's comparing now that how's this similar to oxen? Is we saying, look, a muad ox has to pay, the owner of the muad ox has to pay full payment damages, okay? And a man has to pay full payment damages. So in that case, oxen that are muad are similar to men in terms of the fact that there's full payment damages from choice property. In that way, they're similar. So that's what this explanation of Rav Ula, the son of Rav Idi, is saying, Rav Yossi Haglili, because you would think that since they're similar, that you might have to pay in this case for a muad ox. And you'd need the verse to absolve the ox here so that you don't make that correlation. So it's just as men are always considered muad, so to the oxen that do not obligate payment for aborting offspring are muad. But a time that causes offspring to be aborted does obligate its owner to pay for the fetus. Therefore, the merciful one wrote, the owner of the ox is absolved, to teach that even he, the owner of the tam, is absolved from the payment. So hang on a second. Now the Gemara is really confused, because it was fine if you say the owner of the ox is exempted because of this verse. If you want to say that people are muad and oxen that are muad are similar in nature, but it's not saying that. It's saying the opposite. Is we understand that what Rabbi Akiva is saying is that muad oxen are oxen, and the verse mentions people being muad. So we understand that the verse is explicit, and then wouldn't come to include muad oxen because they are different in that regard. So we're saying, okay, so that's obvious, but then what do we need the verse for? So then he says we need the verse because we couldn't make that association with tam. In other words, a tam ox isn't similar to a man. So you can't make that association in terms of that exemption because they're just not even similar at all. So you might think that a normal muad ox you wouldn't have to pay because, as Rabbi Akiva's point is, that they are dissimilar from a human being. But a tam ox, you would have no reason to see a dissimilarity, and maybe you think you have to pay for a tam ox. Now, the Gemara is going to have very strong words for this. Why do you think the Gemara would have strong words for this? Does this make any sense to you guys?
No.
Why not?
That's a good reason.
Okay.
I'm confused. Just the whole thing at the moment, like it's a bit confusing.
Okay, so it is a bit confusing because it's saying, hang on, I can see if you're on the right track, where you're saying that the muad ox would perhaps be needed exposition of exemption. Okay, in other words, if you want to say a muad ox is similar to a muad man, and you might make an inference together, where you might say that a muad ox, because there's full payment damages, is similar to a man who's full payment damages. Therefore, you would need the verse to exempt such a person. But for tam, it's obviously you wouldn't pay because tam is less stringent than muad. That we can understand. But this particular interpretation of Rav Yossi Haglili is saying the opposite, is that we understand that a muad ox is similar but not the same as a man, and therefore you can see logically that that's exempt. But we need a special verse to basically exclude payment for a tam, which makes absolutely no sense. And the Gemara is going to say a certain insult there. The Gemara rejects this answer. Rav explained, the citizen is on the ground and the alien is in the high heavens. That was his response to the comment. Now, do you think that's a flattering statement?
No.
What do you think that statement means? Guys?
Clicking sound. Do you hear clicking sound?
Yeah, it's the cat. I'm trying to get it off. Yeah?
It's like...
Just say that statement again, James.
So the statement that Rava says in return to this was an insult, but it basically said the citizen is on the ground and the alien is in the high heavens.
The alien?
The alien is in the high heavens. Now that sounds like he's calling him cuckoo, like an alien. And he's saying you're not in touch with reality. But when I read the explanation of this, he did more than insult his intelligence. He called him a Democrat. How did he call him a Democrat, Kevin and Gavin? How do you think?
Alien.
Yes, and go on. What does that mean? So what he was saying is this follow. Is he was saying, look, the citizen is on the ground and the alien is in the high heavens. He said, would you ever have such a society? Oh, God. Just hang on a second. Zans, I'm busy teaching. I can't speak to you at the moment.
Okay, it's fine.
All right. All right. So, guys, what I'm saying is he basically insulted him and he said, look, you would never have a society where the aliens that have gotten citizenship are higher up than the natural citizens born in that country. Okay? Because what you're trying to say here is that people that are Tam are now more stringent than people that are Muad. People that own a Muad. Why? Because if you could say that the owner of a Muad ox is similar to men in that he owes full payment, but we know it's different enough that you don't need the verse, as Rabbi Akiva says, to basically exonerate the owner of a Muad ox in regards to payment if a woman miscarries because the ox attacked her. What would you think that for a Tam where there's more leniency that you would need a special verse? It's more lenient Tam. It's not stronger than a Muad. It's weaker than a Muad. You would owe less. So why would there be more of a stringency? So it's equivalent, he says, of saying that the citizens that gain citizenship but were not naturally born in the country are entitled to more rights than its natural citizens. He said you would never see such a thing. Well,
it's America.
It's America.
Exactly
he insulted him.
Exactly what's happening there now.
Exactly. So he was saying no democratic policy would make sense. This is absolute nonsense. He's not alive today to see what mess America's in. But that's exactly what happens, is that people that are not natural citizens are seen to be entitled to more rights than natural citizens. So it's topsy-turvy. That's what he's saying. So the Gemara is saying, okay, I agree with you, the logic isn't sound, so let me try it again. Okay. So a different explanation of Rav Yossi Aglili is necessary. Rather, they say to Rav, fine, if you insulted the original exposition, have you got a better one on your explanation of Rav Yossi Aglili? He said, yes. He said, you might have thought to say that the verse which Rabbi Akiva cites exempts even a muad, for it implies that men are obligated to pay the value of the fetus, but not oxen that are similar to men. When an oxen similar to men is that it's muad. For a muad ox, you pay full payment damages from choice property. So just as men are muad, so to the oxen whose owners the Torah absolves a muad, and we can derive through a kol v'chomer that Tam animals are certainly absolved from this payment. Therefore, the merciful one subsequently wrote, the owner of the ox is absolved, to teach that only the owner of a Tam to which this phrase refers is absolved, but for paying for the offspring, but the owner of a muad is liable. So what he's saying is, I actually want to teach completely the opposite. What I wanted to say is that we could say that if a muad ox is similar to men in that it's now forewarned and you pay full payment damages, well, then you could say it's responsible for paying for the attacking the fetus. Okay? But for the time, you could never make it that obligated, because the kol v'chomer would dictate that it would be less so. So by specifically absolving the owner of a tam, the Torah indicates the verse, if men shall fight, etc., shall not be expounded to exclude a muad, oxen that are similar to men. So Rav Yossi Aglili's statement that the verse and the owner of the ox is absolved teaches that the tam is absolved from the value of offspring. Must be understood as follows. This is according to Tosfot. Only the tam is absolved from the value of the fetus, but the owner of the muad is not absolved. Okay, so he was saying that special verse is telling you that because of the kol v'chomer, we're absolving the tam, but not the muad. He was saying the opposite way around. You don't absolve the tam and obligate the muad. I'm saying you don't absolve the muad and obligate the tam. You obligate the muad and absolve the tam because the tam is less stringent. Does that make sense? That's the explanation by Tosfot. Now, I must tell you something, guys, that this wording has added a complication where, in my opinion, complication has not been necessary. I don't know if you guys agree with me at all.
Yeah.
I mean, why can't you just say it in the straight way and not have to have Tosfot explain it? Because it does seem a little bit odd. So all we're saying is that this logic makes sense according to Rava's explanation, that the verse is coming to say that a tam isn't liable, but a muad would be liable because it's similar to men, in that once an ox becomes muad, it reaches the category of man that you should have looked after it. Just like a man is responsible for decisions if he hurts another man, so too, if he owns an animal that's dangerous, he's responsible for that condition of that animal if he's forewarned that that animal is dangerous, because it's still a man's rationality that's looking after it. But you could think that he also owes for the tam, because he's responsible also for looking after a tam animal. And we're saying, no, it's not the same level of responsibility, because that animal itself has not had a bad behavior track record, and therefore the owner of the ox is absolved, is used to absolve the owner of a tam ox in the case where the ox damages a woman and kills the fetus. Okay, that's why we need the verse. So that makes a little bit more sense, but the Gemara has an objection. And that objection is, well, how do you explain the case of humiliation? Okay, so what are we talking about here? When a man damages another, if men damage men or a woman, etc., you pay nezek shalem, complete damages, and then in addition you pay for pain, you pay for refuah, medical expensive, you pay for shevet, convalescing, in other words, recovery time, and you pay for beshet, which you pay for humiliation. Why would you pay for humiliation? Is because when you hit by another person and that person has full cognizance of what they're doing, it's absolutely humiliating beshet to be damaged by another person. It's humiliating. So it says, no, something doesn't make sense here. Because if Rava is saying this, you can't say that this rule of exemption only applies with regards to a tam animal, because with regards to the payment of killing a pregnant woman's fetus, because then why would we not then have the same with regards to humiliation? So you're saying, what are you talking about? What's humiliation? So I'll say it to you like this, that we're going to study the verse, and then when we study the verse, it'll make a little bit more sense to you. Okay?
Okay.
So basically what the verse says is as follows. It's the same verse. Okay? So it says, if men fight with one another, and a man and his brother, and the wife of one of them approaches to rescue her husband from the hand of the one who is striking him, and she stretches out her hand and grabs his embarrassing place. So this verse basically implies that only human beings that embarrass must compensate the embarrassed party, but if an animal causes embarrassment, its owner is not liable, simply because an animal has no understanding of human sexuality or embarrassment or anything like that. Are you with me? So Abai asked that the phrase, the owner of the ox is absolved, should define the law which is derived from the verse as it's defined the law regarding payment for fetuses. So that's according to Rashi. So what are we saying is, look, the same place that it's talking biblically about a woman, a man that's responsible for paying if a woman has a miscarriage, is the same place that it says if a woman grabs a man's privates to try and defend her husband from actually incapacitating somebody with pain that's trying to strike him, she has to pay for embarrassment, and an animal doesn't. So it says, look, how can Rava explain that for a tam animal, the verse, the owner of the ox is absolved, is coming to say that basically there's no payment due for tam, but there is payment due for muad. Because then, why can't you parallel that with humiliation? Maybe if your ox is tam, you don't pay anything for humiliation if you say that, but then you should at least pay for humiliation when your ox is muad. Because if you're saying that your ox is similar to men and you're making the inference that your ox is muad, men are muad, you're both equal then to pay for a woman's fetus who miscarries, then why don't you say the same thing for humiliation? And we learned, as far as humiliation is concerned, in Deuteronomy chapter 25, verse 11 to 12, this is where the verse of dragging him in this embarrassing place takes place. And we learn about the other payments that are due when man damages man. And we've learned that the only thing that happens when a animal damages a man is what? Is actual payment. That's all. Actual payment, nezek shalom. That's all. So we're saying that this doesn't actually make any sense. Is that either Rava's explanation you can't have? In other words, the muad ox should be exempt, the same as it is for humiliation, if it attacks a woman and she loses her fetus. Or otherwise, as far as humiliation is concerned, make the owner of the ox pay for a muad ox that humiliates another person by damaging them in their privates or whatever the case may be. Why, in that case, if it's muad, do you not make the humiliation payment due? How do you have it being the same biblical verse in a double rule book? That's the issue at play. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah.
Okay, so although Rava does make more sense, you can see that a buyer's objection to Rava is actually quite valid. Does that make sense? All right, so a buyer said to Rava, but what if you say so? It follows we should say the same thing in regard to the payment of humiliation. Just as the phrase, and the owner of the ox is absolved, teaches that the Torah exempts only a tam from payment for aborted fetuses, so it should teach that only a tam is exempt from paying for humiliation. For we should expound the verse that discusses humiliation as follows. Men who cause humiliation must pay, but not oxen that are similar to men. Just as men are muad, so to the oxen that do not obligate to humiliation payment are muad. And we can derive through a kal v'chomer that the owners of the tam animal are certainly absolved from this payment. Therefore, the merciful one subsequently wrote, the owner of the ox is absolved, to teach that only the owner of the tam is absolved from the payment of humiliation, but the owner of the muad is liable. And if you will say that it is so, the owner of the muad is indeed obligated to pay for humiliation. This cannot be. For if so, the Brisa should have stated the owner of the ox is absolved. Rav Yossi Aglili says he is absolved from payment for the value of offspring and for humiliation. Evidently, Rav Yossi Aglili does not expound the phrase to limit exemptions from monetary liability to a tam. So to take the most complicated sentence and put it simply, he's saying, look, you can't have a double rule book from the same pasuk. That's it. We know you don't pay for humiliation if animals attack a human. That's it. So you can't have it on one case here and a different rule. So now there's a different explanation of Rav Yossi Aglili. Now this is one where a buyer isn't attacking Rava, but they both agree. So rather, Abaye and Rava both say, Rav Yossi Aglili contends that this law cannot be derived from the verse cited by Rabbi Akiva, men but not oxen. For I might think that the verse is not expounded to exempt animals from that which people are liable, but rather to make animals liable in circumstances in which people are exempt. All right. So, guys, when I explain this, it'll make the most sense. The verse would be expounded as follows. In regard to men, if there is no death of a woman whom they strike, they shall be punished monetarily by paying for the aborted fetus. But if there is death of a woman, they shall not be punished monetarily, but rather be subjected to the death penalty. But in regard to oxen, this is not so, for even if there is a death, its owner is punished with monetary payment. Okay, therefore, the merciful one subsequently wrote, the owner of the ox is absolved, to teach that the owner of the ox is absolved from payment for offspring if his animal causes a miscarriage. Okay. So this is what we're saying in a nutshell. Okay. Temporary, go sit down.
I'm just say it again, please.
Oh,
Lost focus for but
Damon's gone. He's back.
yes, go hunt rabbits or something useful. Go hunt them.
Rabbits.
All right.
You know.
So, guys, there's a law, kim lei b'di rabba minay, okay, which means, Kev, Arthur, you haven't done Sanhedrin. Kim lei b'di rabba minay means he stands liable to the penalty greater than it. So that dictates that in cases where a person becomes liable simultaneously to the death penalty and the monetary penalty, only the greater penalty, the death penalty, is imposed. So in the course of a fight, if one of these men strikes the woman and kills her, he's guilty of murder and liable for the death penalty, and consequently is exempt from paying for the aborted fetus. That's according to Rashi. So with Kim lei b'di rabba minay, the monetary occurrence has to be with the same simultaneous act that would cause him to have the death penalty. Let me give you an example. You're about to light your neighbor's Picasso. You don't like it. It's worth 30 million rand and you don't like your neighbor. But you're going to do it on Shabbos, and you've had warnings, and if you do, you're going to get the death penalty for Shabbos, the witnesses, etc. But you know that at least you don't have to pay that money back, what's not coming from your estate. So you hate your neighbor so much, you're prepared to get the death penalty, but you know you've left your family millions, and you know that money for the Picasso that's burnt, they can't claim from the estate. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, because it's done in the same act. So if there are two death penalties, say a person's committed an act of incest and an act of murder, whatever is the more stringent death penalty, there's a whole argument with Rabbi Yehuda who says it's burning, and the rabbis say it's stoning. So they can only kill a person once, so they get the more stringent death penalty.
Yeah.
If it's two death penalties. Okay, and this is in Mishnah Ketubot 36b, but we learned this a lot in Sanhedrin. Okay, so what we're saying is here, listen, it's actually coming to make an animal liable, not exclude an animal's liability. Because the case that we learned before from Rava, and the other case of Rav explained by Rav Yossi Aglili, Rav explained Rav Yossi Aglili, and obviously the other rabbi certainly did, Rav Ulla, the son of Rav Idi, and that both were looking to exempt an animal for payment. This is coming to obligate an animal for payment. So what it's saying is as follows, is that if a human being killed a woman by meaning to strike one of the other fellows, killed her, and she had a miscarriage, he doesn't have to pay for the miscarriage fetus. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. So therefore, the owner of the animal that attacked would then have to pay for the payment. Why? Because the animal doesn't get the, how do I put it? There is a question that why doesn't the animal get the death penalty? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That because there's no kim lei b'di rabba minay with an animal. So it would obviously pay for the woman that got killed, but also the fetus. So it's coming now to say he's obligated for the fetal payment. But when a human being does it, he gets the death penalty and therefore isn't obligated to the fetal payment, if that makes sense. Guys, have I lost you?
No. Yeah. It does make sense because, I'm
Kevin,
slowly understanding.
does it make sense to you?
I went,
Okay, yeah.
does it make sense? Yeah.
You can't kill somebody twice, put it that way.
Explain
You can't,
I know that didn't, That part I missed. You can't kill someone twice.
No.
Yeah,
All right.
if the
all right.
guy, look, Karen, yeah? Okay. Maybe I missed something.
All right. No, Arthur, you never missed anything. Kevin, Gavin and I learned in Sanhedrin 79a, okay?
Yeah.
That basically there's a law of Kim Labadi Rabamine. There's quite a few different discussions here. That if a person basically has a monetary loss in the same thing that obligated him for the death penalty, he doesn't have to pay the monetary amount. Kim Labadi Rabamine means you only have to pay the greater payment. So what I'm saying is as follows. If on Shabbos a Jew breaks Shabbos by burning his neighbor's 30 million rand Picasso with witnesses, etc., because he hates his neighbor, and he's quite willing to give his life to ruin his neighbor, they'll kill him, but they won't make his estate pay the 30 million rand for the Picasso, because the act of breaking Shabbos, of burning the picture, and the act of destroying the picture and causing that monetary damage is one act. So Kim Labadi Rabamine means that you only give the greater penalty. Kev, you falling asleep. Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
The greater penalty.
Yeah. Yes, if you
got
especially
two penalties, you pay the greater one.
Yes, so if a person committed 2 death penalty acts, for example, okay, we can't kill a person twice. We only give them the greater death penalty, and that's a kapara for the lesser death penalty.
Okay.
So
can't get a death penalty twice.
Correct. So I'm saying in any case where there are two penalties that are exacted from the same act, or that they're 2 separate acts, but you could only give 1 death penalty. Look, a guy's created many offenses. In one offense, he's liable for stoning. Another one, he's liable maybe for beheading or burning, etc. A person can only get the death penalty once. So if he makes a proper teshuvah, they give him the most stringent death penalty for the stringent offense, not because it's the most stringent, but because of all his crimes, they're all assessed together. And they say, well, what's the most stringent death penalty about? Maybe he's got 2 or 3 crimes. They don't just, if he doesn't have a stringent death penalty. Kev, you falling asleep again. Okay, so explain to me, Kim Labadi Rabamine, Kev.
So if there's an offense, if somebody committed an offense, more than one offense, and there was more, and both of those offenses made him liable to receive the death penalty, can only receive it once, and if one was more stringent than the other, then that one is levied. Is that right? Is that what you said?
Yes, there are 2 different cases. Let's take a case.
2 different types of death penalties.
No, let's take 2 cases. The guy has created, Gavin, 2 different crimes at which he's liable to 2 different death penalties. Say he murdered somebody, at which case, what is the punishment? Death by sword. Are you with me? To murder somebody, it's death by sword. It's beheading. But that's relatively less painful than having hot metal put down your throat for certain acts, which would be strafer, that would be burning, or stoning, skilla. So certain acts would create a much more harsh death penalty. So if you did 2 different acts that would warrant 2 different death penalties, the Beit then gives the more stringent penalty because that covers the lesser penalty. So in the case of 2 death penalties, it can only kill a person once. It gives the more stringent penalty to cover the lesser penalty. That's in death penalty and death penalty cases. Now you might have a different case where somebody did something like broke Shabbos and then cost maybe R1 million worth of damage for arson. But because he gets the death penalty for burning on Shabbos, the arson charges are dropped against him, Kevin. Why are they dropped? Because it's a lesser penalty compared to the death penalty. So Kim Labadi Rabamine implies that we only give the more stringent of the 2 penalties if there's a monetary penalty and a death penalty on an act that's created simultaneously. With two separate death penalty acts, they don't have to be created simultaneously. In other words, there can be where a person is eligible to two different death penalty sentences, but they can only carry out the sentence once. When there's a death penalty payment or a monetary payment, it has to be from the same simultaneous act. So what we are saying is here is that Abaya and Rava have now, the opinion is that they explain Rav Yossi Aglili as saying, look, we are actually exempting human beings and making animals liable. So the owner of the ox is liable, is absolved. He's absolved from the death penalty, but not from payment. So it was saying, look, if a man is trying to kill another man and kills a woman in the process and she loses her fetus, had he not killed her, he would pay damages to the father of that fetus for the loss of that fetus, for that miscarriage. But since the woman died in that process, he's now obligated to the death penalty, so therefore he doesn't have to pay for the miscarriage she caused, because they give him the greater penalty, the death penalty. If the owner of the ox kills a woman, that owner of the ox is absolved. He's not given the death penalty. He only has to pay the penalty, the damages, the financial monetary damages that his ox has caused, both to the woman's death as well as to the miscarriage that occurred, to both. So which means Abaya and Rava are explaining, Rav Yossi Aglili is saying, the owner of the ox is absolved for the death penalty, but he's not absolved from monetary payment. Whereas normally, if a man intending to kill a man kills a woman, he's liable. He's liable to the death penalty, and therefore he doesn't have to pay the monetary payment. That's how it's explained. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Me.
All right. So there is one quick objection, and then we're gonna go on. Guys, what time's mincha? Quickly, how long do we have?
What's the latest we can do? 25 past or what, Kevin?
Yeah, that's still, that's still time.
All right.
What time was Kamma daf? It was about 5:12 last week, 5:15, I think, 5:12 and 18, so it's 5:30. So at 5:25,
Yeah, I'm saying 5:25, we'll call it.
Yeah, 5:25 should be okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Another 15, 16, 17 minutes.
Yeah.
All right. So look, Rav Ada Bar Ahava has got an objection to this. What's the objection? In order to explain the objection, you guys need a bit of background. Gavin has this. In Sanhedrin 79a, there's a dispute recorded regarding the circumstances necessary to impose the death penalty for murder, okay? So basically the rabbis maintain that the death penalty applies any time the killer had intention to kill. Even if he had been attempting to kill a certain person and in the process killing a different person by mistake. Why? Because since he had the intent to kill a person and did in fact do so, he's liable. That's what the rabbis say. Rabbi Shimon, on the other hand, maintains that a killer is put to death only when the person he slew wasn't his intended victim. However, if he intended to kill one person and accidentally killed another, he's exempt for capital punishment, right? So look at this passage. If men shall fight. So that's describing a case where a man was trying to kill another man. And in the process of this fight, he jolted a pregnant woman and causes her to miscarry. So if there's no fatality, in other words, Abai and Rava understand that to mean that the woman wasn't killed. In that case, only he must only pay for the fetus. But if the woman was killed, he would not pay for the fetus because he's liable to the death penalty. So because the Abai and Rava subscribe to the rabbis, but Rav Ada Bar Ahava subscribes to the opinion of Rav Shimon, who said, listen, there's no death penalty here because the guy in a bar fight was trying to kill the other guy. He killed the wife by accident. So therefore, we don't put him to death. So he owes for payment for the fetus and the woman. And the woman. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Art, what am I trying to say? Let's see if you understand it.
No, you have to go somewhere urgently. So.
All right. So, Rav Ada bar Ahava objected to this explanation. Is this in the matter of exemption from monetary liability for the offspring dependent on the mere occurrence of death, while the matter is dependent on the intent of the murderer? Only if he intended to kill the person he killed is he exempt from a simultaneous incurred monetary payment. Consequently, the verse doesn't imply that people are exempt from liability if the woman was killed, and hence the term men cannot have been understood to obligate the owner of the ox to pay in those circumstances. Okay? So basically, Rav Ada bar Ahava has to revise the explanation of Abaya and Rava if he's holding by Rav Shimon. So he said, we would have thought that the verse implies the following distinction between men and oxen. In regard to men, if they intended to kill each other, then even if there's the death of a pregnant woman, they shall be punished monetarily. But if they intended to kill the woman herself, they're not punished monetarily if she's killed. But this is not the case in regard to oxen, for even if the ox intended to kill the woman herself, the owners will be punished monetarily only for the dead offspring. Therefore, the merciful one wrote that the owner of the ox is absolved, to teach that the owners of the are absolved from paying for miscarriages caused by the oxen. Okay. Guys, do you understand the difference?
Yeah.
Okay. Look, the thing of it is, there is a ton in the Academy of Rav Chizkiah who said, although he subscribes to the view of Rav Shimon that one who intended to kill one person and instead killed another is exempt from the death penalty, he maintains that the killer is nonetheless also exempt from any simultaneously occurring monetary penalty, because the mere fact that the act committed is one of killing a human being is punishable by death just because of the act itself. Even if he's off the hook because he killed the wrong person, if you're holding up Rav Shimon, it still exempts the killer from any monetary payment because that sort of killing does deserve the death penalty resulting from his act. So according to this opinion, the guilty party in our case would be exempt from paying for the offspring, even though he's exempt from the death of killing a woman. You understand the three views, guys?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's interesting.
All right, so Art, can I give it to you in 3 sentences? What? Okay. So the first thing is we've got Abaya and Rava that turn around and hold by the rabbis. And Kev, you falling asleep? Okay, which basically states, the rabbis state that Arthur, doesn't matter if you intended to kill another person. If a person intends to kill a Jew and they kill another Jew, they're liable to the death penalty. Doesn't matter if the aim was bad. Okay? So they basically saying that since this person missed, the guy was going to hit the man, missed and hit the woman, and then killed the fetus, in that particular case, he has to pay the monetary damage for the fetus, but he doesn't have to pay. He doesn't have to pay, because he didn't kill the woman. So he's not liable to the death penalty. But if he'd have killed the woman, he would have got the death penalty and there's no monetary payment. But if he just killed the fetus, it's called a non-viable fetus. There's only a payment. There's no death penalty for that. Okay? For killing a fetus. But if you want to hold like Rabbi Shimon, obviously this particular Tana does, he's saying, look, the fact of it is, even if he'd have killed the woman, according to Rav Ada bar Ahava, but he was meant to kill the guy, there's no death penalty. So in that case, you only pay for the fetus. But we're saying that what happens with an animal is that animals that generally kill a person, say they killed the woman, this is according to Abai and Rava, because they hold like the rabbis, even if they were meant to kill the men, but he killed the woman, then they're liable to the death penalty for killing the woman, so they don't have to pay for the fetus. But an animal isn't liable for the death penalty for killing a Jew. The owner's animal isn't. That ox is stoned. If they're witnesses, that ox is stoned. But he still has to make financial reparations. But the verse, the owner of the ox is absolved, means he's absolved from the death penalty, but he's liable for financial payment. That's what it's saying. And then those that hold that he's not liable for financial payment are holding that, even if you're holding according to Rav Shimon, that you're not liable for the death of the woman. There's some opinions that say that, well, then you have to pay the monetary payment for the fetus. Why? And obviously whatever you'd have to pay for the woman, because there's no death penalty. But there's some that say there's no monetary payment, because any act, just because you got off the hook with the technicality, because you didn't mean to, according to Rav Shimon, kill the woman, you still don't have to pay monetary payment, because the law of Kim Labati Rabba Minaim applies, because for the very act of killing a Jew, one should get the death penalty. So those are the three opinions.
Damon?
Yeah?
It's all based on intention. You're going to look at the intention.
Well, it's only based on intention. No. According to Abaya and Rava, it's not based on intention, because they hold like the rabbis. So in their case, it's not the intention. If they kill a Jew, even they intended to kill another Jew, they're liable to the death penalty. Therefore, they don't have to pay the monetary payment, because they're going to get the death penalty. They're off the hook for the monetary payment. Because by killing the woman, they're going to get the death penalty, even though they try to kill the man. But they then don't have to pay for the fetus of the woman that was killed in the same act simultaneously. Because Abaya and Rava hold, like the rabbis that say, even if you intended to kill and you killed the wrong person, you killed a Jew, one's liable for the death penalty. However, it's a different case according to Rav Adabar Hava, who holds like Rav Shimon, and says intention is everything. Meaning, you were going to kill the guy, but you ended up killing the woman. You don't get the death penalty, so therefore you have to pay the monetary payment. And the Tan of Chizkiah school said you don't have to pay the monetary payment, because even though he holds like Rabbi Shimon, that intent is everything. In that particular case, the act of killing, if there's a simultaneous monetary payment by the same act, like you accidentally kill the woman instead of the guy, and she loses her fetus, you wouldn't have to pay for the fetus, because that's in principle a death penalty act, had they intended to kill the woman. Those are the three opinions.
Damon, I love you, mate, but this thing is like, so which one's right out of the three guys? I mean, which one do we hold by? Or it's just
Well, I think most of the time people hold by the rabbis in halacha that if you killed the wrong Jew, one would get the death penalty. The reason being is the examples of the ox with Rav Eliezer that said an ox was intending to kill an animal but killed a Jew. Okay, in that particular case, it's different to trying to kill one Jew and missing and killing another. The minute you try and kill one Jew and miss and kill another, that's already death penalty, because your intention is to kill a Jew.
Yeah, doesn't make a difference what Jew it is.
Not to kill a Jew, but you end up killing a Jew. Like you're meant to kill an animal that tried to buck you, and you missed. That's a different case because again, the rabbi said as follows: what was your intent? To kill a Jew? Yes. So what difference does it make what Jew?
Okay, so for example, something's charging you, right? You take out your gun and you shoot it. You miss the cow, but you kill a Jew. You're off the hook because your intention was to kill the cow, not the charging animal, and not the actual Jew.
Correct. Now the interesting question would be, that's exactly it. So they're saying that. So what? You didn't aim for her. Did you intend to kill a Jew? Yes. Then what's it to discuss? Okay. So that's exactly it, guys. I hope I explained it okay. We're going to end off saying